In this presentation, you will learn about quantitative and qualitative methods. Quantitative and qualitative methods are paradigms used in social research. They provide the researcher with a framework or design on the ways of conducting research, especially with collection and analysis of collected data. Before delving into what these methods are and what their uses entail, let's briefly understand what social research is. Research refers to the process of steps used to collect and analyze information to increase our understanding of a topic or issue. Social research in specific has been defined as one among many ways of constructing representations of social life. It is the product of individuals or a group of individuals that addresses a socially significant phenomena, engages directly or indirectly with ideas or social theory, incorporates large amounts of appropriate evidence that has been purposefully collected, and results from the systematic analysis of this evidence. Social research involves an interface between ideas and evidence. While the former allows the researcher to comprehend the evidence collected, the latter allows ideas to be elaborated, tested, revised, or in certain cases even rejected. Social research is hence aimed at exploring, describing, explaining, or predicting different social phenomena through data collection and analysis. Depending on what the research problem, the question, the aim of the study is, the researcher will have to choose an ideal method for data collection. The method the researcher chooses to employ will then lead them to a research design, which in turn will lead them to the procedures and techniques of conducting the study. It is important that the method chosen should be one which will allow the researcher to obtain the kind of data which will aid them in achieving the objectives or test the hypothesis of the study. The type of data being collected and analyzed could be broadly classified into two categories. Numeric information gathered on scales of instruments, which is quantitative, or text information which is recorded and reported from the participant's perspective, which is qualitative. Once the data has been collected, it could be inferred either in the form of statistical results quantitatively or by identifying the recurring qualities and themes and patterns which may have emerged qualitatively. In several researches, both quantitative and qualitative data are collected and analyzed. This is known as the mixed method. Both quantitative and qualitative methods have a number of techniques which could be used by the researcher. For example, surveys, experiments, ethnographies, case studies, etc. Despite the contentions by several scholars to depict one method as superior to another, it is interesting to note that quantitative and qualitative methods tend to overlap each other quite often. As Creswell puts it, all social scientists gather data systematically, make careful comparisons, and use critical thinking. By understanding both approaches, you can best understand the full range of social scientific research and use them in complementary ways. While the designs and objectives of both methods tend to differ in various ways, it is vital to remember that social research must always be conducted in a scientific manner and must be consistently backed by adequate evidence, either quantitatively, qualitatively, or by both. Quantitative research. Quantitative social research is understood as one of the most popular streams of research due to its evident and quantifiable configuration. A research which operates under the quantitative methodology uses statistical and numerical data to test or prove a hypothesis or theory in question. They use standardized test results and value-free quantified measures in order to understand a particular social problem. Theoretically, quantitative researchers utilize a positivist paradigm. This implies that the predictability of the subject matter is taken for granted. It follows the assumption that social subject matters follow a set of laws in a sequential manner, and therefore it is possible to anticipate and predict the course of action in a given similar context. Quantitative researchers accentuate from theory to hypothesis to data to finally come to conclusion. Hence, it holds a deductive approach. This implies that it goes from an established law to many departing points. They predominantly deal with material traits, physical development, artifacts, and empirical observations when collecting data. It attempts to grasp information at a surface level and practices a macro-level approach when conducting the study. Characteristics of quantitative research. Some of the other characteristics of quantitative research are: in a quantitative research, the research problem is described through a description of trends or by the need to provide a rationale for the relationship between the variables involved. The literature review is of significance as it provides a justification for the research questions being asked. It also aids in establishing the need for the research. The statement of purpose, the research questions, and the hypothesis is specific, measurable, and should be quantifiable in a structured, uniform manner. Numerical data is collected from a large number of samples using instruments with preset questions and responses. Once the data has been collected, it is depicted through statistical figures, mathematical processing, and manipulation and graphical representation. This allows the data to be analyzed by relating variables, comparing groups, or establishing a pattern or trend, which is then interpreted by comparing them to prior predictions or past research. The final research report must have a fixed structure and evaluation criteria and must be objective in nature. The researcher must take an unbiased approach and ensure that only value-free, measurable facts are presented. He or she should be passive and neutral during the course of the study. Quantitative research is conducted independent of the larger context and predominantly aims to portray or establish a relationship between the variables in question. Quantitative research puts emphasis on precise and exact measurement of the variables. This is done to ensure that further statistical manipulation, comparison, and mathematical processing is feasible. Reliability, objectivity, and validity of data are important values in quantitative research. Ontologically, quantitative research deals with numbers and occurs in an artificial setting, with the researcher aiming to come at some kind of generalization. In a quantitative study, the researcher identifies the research problem based on trends in the field or the need to explain why something occurs. This means that the researcher attempts to establish an overall pattern from the responses provided by individuals and seeks to understand how this may vary among people. Other quantitative studies aim to explain the relation between variables and how one may affect the other. Variables are an attribute or characteristic of individuals that the researchers study. In social science, three kinds of variables may be used: nominal, ordinal, and interval. In corroborating the relation between these variables, the researcher seeks to determine if these variables could be influencing one another. Hence, the focus of quantitative approach is in carefully measuring a set of variables to answer theory-guided research questions and hypotheses. Since the scope of a quantitative research is narrow, while framing the research question and purpose statement, The researcher must take care to think and identify the variables which they wish to study and also provide a rationale for the same. In studying these variables, the researcher must be able to obtain some measure or assessment on a pre-created instrument or record. Instruments are tools used for measuring, observing, and documenting quantitative data. It contains specific questions and possible responses which has been developed by the researcher earlier. This instrument or record should allow the data to be marked numerically on a scale of observation. Examples of instruments are standardized tests, survey questionnaires, or checklists. The aim behind this form of data collection is to enable generalization of results, that is to apply whatever has been studied from a small number of people to a larger group. Once the data has been collected, then it is analyzed through mathematical procedures called statistics. In this stage, the data is broken down into parts to answer the research question. This includes comparing the responses given by the individuals and relating their scores to support or defend the research questions and hypotheses. Analysis is done with the help of prior studies or results which may have been predicted earlier, and this will enable us to know if the data collected supports the assertions made earlier. Four main types or designs. Primarily in the realm of social research, there are four main types of designs used to conduct a quantitative research: experiment, quasi-experiment, descriptive surveys, correlational design. Experiment. Experiments have been defined as those in which the researcher manipulates conditions for some research participants but not others, and then compares group responses to see whether doing so made a difference. Experiments aim to understand the influence and relation between the dependent and independent variable. It is predominantly used in psychology and finds limited application in sociological research. They are extremely useful in explanatory researches. Quasi-experimental causal comparative. This is a research design that seeks to find relationships between independent and dependent variables after an action or event has already occurred. The researcher does this by comparing two or more groups of individuals. It is referred to as quasi-experimental or post-facto research. Quasi-experiments differ from experiments in the case that unlike in an experiment, where the sampling is often random, quasi-experiments have predetermined groups. While the setting may not be natural, there is no control or manipulation of variables. Descriptive surveys. Surveys are most commonly used for the purpose of descriptive research. These aim to answer or describe a particular phenomenon. A survey is a method used in a descriptive quantitative research in which the researcher systematically asks a large number of people the same questions and then records their answers. An integral method of quantitative research is it collects surface level quantitative data from a large number of people at any given point of time in order to arrive at conclusions which may be statistically processed for further studies. For the purpose of conducting a survey, researchers popularly employ a questionnaire. This is done to learn about the preferences, opinions, behavior, attitudes of a large group of people within a limited time frame. Unlike in an experiment, conditions or variables are not manipulated in a survey to understand the participants' response. Often, a random sampling technique is used in order to get a representative sample. This will aid the researcher to generalize the collected information from the smaller group to the larger population. The quantitative value of each question in the survey is preset. This enables the researcher to analyze them statistically and present them in the form of graphs, tables, or charts. Correlational designs allow researchers to predict scores and explain the relationship among variables. In correlational research designs, investigators use the correlation statistical test to describe and measure the degree of association between two or more variables or sets of scores. In this design, the variables are not controlled or manipulated as in an experiment. Instead, using the correlation statistic, they relate two or more scores for each person. This design is utilized by the researcher to relate two or more variables to see if they influence each other. It allows the researcher to predict a possible outcome, which could be backed by statistical data. While social quantitative researchers attempt to establish a relation or correlation between the variables in the study, it is often just a part of a larger study. Correlation is not frequently used as the sole singular method of research. Irrespective of the design used by the researcher, all these approaches share the common goal of helping the researcher make inferences about the correlation among variables and how the results derived could be generalized to a broader population. Qualitative research. It can be defined as a detailed study of a phenomenon conducted in its natural setting in a planned and scientific manner in order to arrive at the correct interpretation of the study undertaken by the researcher. Qualitative research is carried out to understand a particular social phenomenon in greater detail. This could be for a number of reasons. Due to little existing literature on the topic, if it is an emerging issue, if the topic has not been addressed or studied before, if the researcher is aiming to provide a newer interpretation on the matter. In a broader sense, qualitative research is used for exploring and understanding how individuals or groups perceive or ascribe to a certain social or human problem. Qualitative research involves working around emerging questions and procedures through the perspective of the participants involved. The questions asked are open-ended and non-directional in order to get the honest perspectives and views of the participants. They begin with the terms what and how rather than why. The questions are often quite broad and not specific or to the point. Alan Bryman has presented three primary aspects of qualitative research. Qualitative research is inductive in nature. This means that a theory is generated from associated research. Epistemologically, it is interpretative in nature. In a qualitative study, the researcher attempts to interpret the multidimensional and multivariable socio-cultural backdrop from two angles, from the participant's perspective and from the researcher's viewpoint. Based on his or her interpretation of the same, the researcher then arrives at the real meaning of the social phenomena. Ontologically, the research is said to be constructivist. This implies that social properties are an outcome of the interaction between individuals rather than being caused by an external phenomenon. Hence, the researcher will have to construct the meaning of the phenomena from the several threads of reality which emerge from his or her study. Characteristics of qualitative research. Qualitative research is descriptive in nature, hence it does not aim to quantify, rather it looks to observe, understand and interpret the variables and the larger phenomenon under study using verbal and qualitative interpretations. They occur in a natural setting. The backdrop for conducting the study is not in an artificial or contrived environment. Since qualitative research aims to understand people's experiences and ideas, these are best appreciated and expressed in an organic context. An artificial setting defeats the purpose of a qualitative research. In a qualitative study, the researcher plays a crucial role. While the participants' views are important, the researcher is the key element who controls the situation in order to achieve the objectives of the study. Hence, researchers are crucial for observing the situations, navigating the process, and for adequately perceiving and connecting the data collected. The sample size of the research is small. However, it covers multiple issues in depth, thereby getting numerous threads and perspectives into the research problem. Qualitative research provides a holistic account of the research. Qualitative research handles non-tangible and non-material traits. It aims to understand the experiences, opinions, aspirations, feelings, and perceptions which the participants have. Qualitative research does not claim to be value-free. In the totality of the research, the researcher's own perspectives and values are also included in the study. Authenticity and totality are important values when assessing the quality of a qualitative research. Theoretically, qualitative research uses multiple sources of information to understand a phenomenon in its entirety. Hence, it falls under the interpretative paradigm. Hermeneutics and phenomenology are the basic theoretical assumptions upon which qualitative research rests. Hermeneutics refers to the branch of knowledge concerned with interpretation of texts. It looks beyond the surface level and attempts to understand the more creative meaning of the text. Phenomenology, on the other hand, aims to clarify, describe, and make sense of the dynamics of human experiences. Emphasis of a qualitative research lies in understanding a particular variable and interpreting it in the larger context of things. In qualitative research, the investigator develops patterns and themes from the data collected in order to crystallize it into a more abstract pattern. Qualitative research doesn't follow a pre-planned rigid design. Often the method of designing the research emerges as the study progresses. This is also because there are a number of variables and perspectives which may get introduced to the study as it proceeds. The trajectory of a qualitative research is fluid. The researcher can only work with a general flexible design which will develop with the research. Since qualitative research is interpretative in nature, it is difficult for it to hold external validity. Often the studies are executed in a particular social setting. The data being collected may hold relevance in that context and is bound to have some kind of variation in another context or situation. The data collected could be interpreted in a number of ways, even though the final validation may vary from one context to another and based on the views of the researcher. Hence, it is subjective in nature. The design of a qualitative research begins with a central research problem or issue from which a research question and central objectives are formed. When designing a qualitative research, a couple of factors must be considered. Participants must be identified through purposeful sampling rather than random sampling. The people selected should be able to aid the researcher in understanding the social phenomena in a way most suitable for achieving the objectives and aims of the research. Qualitative researches require more interaction with the participants. There is often a greater need to communicate with them. Prior permission should be taken and it should be feasible to interact with the participant. Since the approach relies heavily on the views given by the participants, care must be taken when developing the instrument. It shouldn't be close-ended, insensitive, or restrict the views of the participants in any way. Creswell, in Qualitative Inquiry, summarizes the steps of conducting a qualitative research. The researcher frames the study within the assumptions and characteristics of a qualitative research. They must then begin collecting data. The researcher acts as the tool for data collection, sensitively amassing the participants' views. They then analyze the data inductively to establish themes or patterns which may have emerged. Techniques to collect data qualitatively. There are a number of techniques used to collect qualitative data. Narrative research. Narrative research is a qualitative research design which is commonly used in social science. The researcher attempts to study the lives of individuals and asks one or more individuals to provide stories about their lives or a particular social incident. The researcher must therefore collect information from a number of sources, the central figure as well as from associates in order to get a larger picture. Then, based on a theme or chronology, this information is retold or restoried by the researcher into a narrative chronology. Additionally, it is crucial that the researcher verifies the validity of the information that is narrated to him. Hence, the central source must be chosen with utmost care. Phenomenological research. Phenomenological research is a research design more commonly used in philosophy and psychology. Through this method, the researcher describes the lived experiences of individuals about a phenomenon as described by participants. The researcher amasses information provided by several individuals who have all experienced the central phenomenon being studied. It is primarily done by conducting a number of interviews with the participants involved. Ethnography. Ethnography is a method of qualitative research in which the researcher studies the shared patterns or behaviors, language, and actions of an intact cultural group in a natural setting over a prolonged period of time. It is commonly used in anthropology and sociology. Primary data collection mainly involves observations and interviews in order to understand the participants better. There are, however, a number of ethical concerns involved in conducting ethnography, and extra care must be taken to ensure that neither the researcher or the group being studied are impacted to the extent where the integrity of the research is compromised. Case studies are utilized in many fields of social research. They are popularly used to evaluate the scope or functioning of an occurrence or phenomena. In this method, the researcher develops an in-depth analysis of a case. Cases are bound by time and activity, and researchers collect detailed information using a variety of data collection procedures over a sustained period of time. Mixed method research. This is an approach to inquiry involving collecting both quantitative and qualitative data, integrating the two forms of data, and using distinct designs that may involve philosophical assumptions and theoretical frameworks. As Creswell put it, the core assumption of this form of inquiry is that the integration of qualitative and quantitative data yields additional insight beyond the information provided by either alone. To summarize, research refers to the process of steps used to collect and analyze information to increase our understanding of a topic or issue. Social research in specific has been defined as one among many ways of constructing representations of social life. It is the product of individuals that addresses a socially significant phenomena, engages directly or indirectly with ideas or social theory, incorporates large amounts of appropriate evidence that has been purposefully collected, and results from the systematic analysis of this evidence. Quantitative social research is understood as one of the most popular streams of research due to its evident and quantifiable configuration. Thank you for watching the presentation.